Hello and welcome to this first look exploring session looking at Work for Cutlers, or a merry dialogue between sword, rapier and dagger. This is one of these short university entertainments from Cambridge in this particular instance, where some things have a chat. They have a bit of an argument, and it's a sketch, really. It's not desperately long. And I'll decide whether we're going to stop and start or not as we go through it. I might just let it play to the end because it's not, I say, desperately long, but it is interesting. Dates from around 1614-15, and is we're running low now on the slightly silly academic entertainments, but I've said that before and then found more. So we'll see whether this is an ending or just a glorious beginning. Reading today, Dagger is...
Hi, I'm Lynn, coming to you from the northwestern United States.
Reading Rapier is...
Rachel, in Canada.
And reading Sword is...
My name is Alexandra, and I am appropriately armed.
My dad.
Yes, and there might be a reason why Alexandra was... I waited till someone like Alexandra was in the room, because they might know a little bit about the weaponry at play here. So we'll come to that once we got a little bit out of the text. So the scene. Enter Sword, and let's see what comes out of the text.
Hey, Rapier, come forth, I say. I'll give thee a crown, though it be but a cracked one. What, art so hard to be drawn forth, Rapier?
Enter Rapier.
But thou shalt know that Rapier dares enter. Nay, backsword.
Enter Dagger. He holds Rapier's hands behind him.
Ooh, who's behind me?
'Tis Dagger, sir. What, will you never leave your quarrelling?
Well, sword, Dagger hath defended you a good many times, but 'tis no matter. Another time shall serve. Shall I get you out sword alone, that I may have you single sword?
Yes, if you'll be single Rapier, too.
Nay, sword, put the case of rapiers aside, that there were two of them. I hope you were able to buckle with them.
I'll tell you what, if I go into the field with him, hang sword up, if I do not cut Rapier's points and lash him when I have done, nay, you shall find sword metal to the very back, put my teeth be an edge at him.
If you offer but to thrust towards him, Rapier, I'll strike you down.
Hang him, I defy him, base Spaniard!
Defy me, Sir Sword. Rapier spits in my face. I darest meet me in the fields, cravenly capon.
Capon!
Aye, capon, so I say, sir.
Why, any man may see that thou art well carved, sword, and yet methinks that Rapier should not speak of that, for it's 100 to 1 if he be not guilt too.
Well, Rapier, if thou goest into the field with me, I'll make a capon of you before I have done with you. You shall ne'er come home uncut, I'll warrant you.
Nay, you shall find sword a notable cutter.
He a cutter? Alas, he ne'er went in the fields yet, but he was soundly hacked before he came out.
There talk you of hacking, for 'tis 100 to 1 if you have not the foil, Rapier.
Foot if you be a short sword, Rapier ne'er fears you. Come along.
Nay, ne'er go, for if you do, I'll send one after you, which shall scour you both. The cutler can do it. I have seen him handle you both bravely.
The cutler, alas, we are the best friends he has, and if it were not for us, the cutler might soon shut up his shop.
Alas, sword, you need not talk of his shutting up his shop, and if it had not been for him, you had broken by this time, sword. Nay, ne'er talk, for you know he can hold your nose to the grindstone when he list. And as for you, Rapier, you know he brought you up first, and if you had stayed with him, it might have been better for you.
Better for me. Alas, he knew not how to use me.
He used you too well, indeed, And when you were with him, he finished you with silver and everything. And now you are out of all fashion. You are even like a lapwing. You are no sooner hatched, Rapier, but you run abroad presently from him.
Yet I scorn to run away from him.
But it were more wisdom than to stand, for the cutler is a man well armed, as well armed as any man I know, and has a good skill in his weapons.
Ha, sword! Is the wind at that door? Faith, now I see which way you stand bent, sword. You had rather sleep in a whole skin than go to the fields to try thyself.
Sir, sword has been proven before now, and yet he'll prove himself again with you if you dare follow him.
Do you hear, sword? If you go, look for Dagger at your back presently, for I am a justice of peace, and am sworn to keep and defend the peace.
Okay, we'll pause there. Let's take in a little bit of this argument. Just marking my script because there's no useful points to know where we'd actually got to. While I scroll back and beware when scrolling through your text. It's quite difficult to find where you are. We have a sword and a rapier are having an argument. Alexandra, what is the difference between a sword and a rapier? Not to put you on the spot, or anything, just throw. What you got?
So I think from context that this particular sword is a backsword, which is to say it has a flat edge and a cutting edge, a sharpened edge, whereas a rapier is sharpened on both sides. And this is, I think, in this period. When exactly are we?
16, 14, 15-ish. Early 17th century.
Right. So the rapier at this point is still relatively new. It has become the sort of the common weapon of gentlemen. It's become the general fashion. But in terms of other weaponry that is available, backswords are still in use. And I think part of the argument that is currently happening is related to the fact that a rapier can be used as a case of rapiers, as a pair. That's what that means, two at the same time. Or, much more commonly, it would have been used with a companion weapon such as a dagger, or a buckler, or a cloak, or something else. Whereas the backsword is kind of theoretically on its own. So those are some of the differences that we're currently encountering. Also, because of progress in metallurgy happening over the past century, as it were, a rapier can be made to be thinner and longer, and therefore sort of potentially be used more dangerously, especially in the circumstances of kind of civil broil, rather than as suggested by place which we shall not name. Whereas a backsword originates more as a military weapon. A rapier is a robing sword. It is a nobleman's court sword.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got class things going on here. We've got a practical sword as opposed to a slightly more fancy thing that someone who may have affectations may wish to have in place. And of course, then there's Dagger, who everybody has. Presumably, I'm assuming that because everybody's got a knife of some description, and you can be used in combination with swords or rapiers in that sort of logic.
Well, the style of using a longer sword in one hand and a shorter dagger in the other, this idea of using sword and companion, is much more inclined towards the rapier and dagger, rather than side sword of any ilk. So daggers do exist, but as a technique for using both at the same time, the combination is most commonly rapier and dagger.
The dagger seems to be here primarily as a sort of stop fighting. Because how does the dagger introduce himself? He goes behind rapiers. There's a dagger behind you, sir. How many plays? Plus, potential sexual innuendo to be played out there by a performance, presumably by boys or young men, if we're talking a university context. So I'm sure there's a gag there. There's lots of gags here.
As it were, a gag. Never mind.
There is a gag I recognise. Sorry, Alexandra.
I was just going to add the insult of Spaniard has something behind it as well, because and actually Craven as well, but they're different things. So a lot of the techniques that would have been taught, again, the greatest masters, the most famous and most successful masters, at least in Britain at this point, were either of the Spanish school or of the Italian school, and there was a lot of bad blood between them, and a lot of sort of oh, your techniques are rubbish, your style is stupid, and that's part of what's going on here with Spaniard. And then of course, because it allows people to maneuver around an opponent a bit more, it allows people to reach out from farther away, and also with a companion weapon like a dagger, opportunities for backstabbing and other such ungentlemanly behavior. It's a cravenly way of fighting from the perspective of the older generation.
Yes, and I think the way these characters are personated functions that way as well. That you've got Sword, who is sort of presented as a slightly more old school soldiery type, Rapier, who is this upstart, potentially literally a Spaniard. They're being presented in quite different ways. Rachel.
I also noticed that Dagger, who claims to be the justice of the peace, is threatening to stab people in the back. I kind of like the idea of justice stabbing people in the back as a commentary, not as a real practice.
Yes, he does identify as a justice of the peace, and that's sort of interesting. Wouldn't a shield, a buckler, or be something more appropriate than a dagger in this context? I'm sort of curious about that. But no, just stabbiness.
It's also interesting that Sword has had some injuries, has been hacked, has had some chunks bitten out, which the Sword is proud not to have experienced. But it also means he's either been in fights less, or that he is implicitly more brittle. And then they introduced the Cutler as the
this offstage character who we never meet.
Yeah. But it's that would be the what is the word? Not artificer, the artisan who would be making them and fixing them and ornamenting them and mending them and all of this. And I love the fact that they are all terrified of effectively this kind of godlike figure.
Yes, he makes us. He is this offstage.
He can also melt us all down, right?
Yeah. He's the button molder.
Yeah.
Okay, so Justice of the Peace has sworn to defend the peace, which is where we got up to. Let us see where the text takes us from this point. Rapier, I think you're up next.
Sir, we will fight, and do you take it in Dungeon Dagger, if you please. If you once offer to hinder us, I'll so pummel you, Dagger, that you were never better pummeled in your life. And howsoever I hope there's law against you as well as others, and Rapier can put up a case against you.
Alas, I care not if you were both plaintiffs against me. You shall find Dagger your defendant, I'll warrant you. If need me, I could put up an action of battery against you.
Alas, I care not if you were both, but no, that's not my line. What talk you of law? Sword scorns to have any other law than martial law, and that upon you, Rapier.
Away, Sword. The time was indeed when thou wast a notable swashbuckler, but now thou art grown an old Sword.
You do well to excuse his cowardice.
Why, sir, 'tis well known that Sword hath flourished in his days.
Flourished in faith, sir. I have seen Sword hang with nothing but scarves ere now.
With scarves? With a halter if he had been well served, for he is a notable thief.
A thief?
Aye, a thief. Did you never hear of Cutting Dick? This is the very same man.
Nay, Rapier, never his sword in the teeth with that, for you know you were both indicted for treason before now, and were in danger to be hanged and drawn too, and had escaped well if you had not been quartered.
I hope knows how to keep his quarters.
You are a crafty fox, Sword. If it were well if you knew how to keep your friendships too, for gentlemen and friends should not fall out.
Rapier, a gentleman.
A gentleman, and has arms.
But methinks Sword, by the very sounding of his name, should be the better gentleman, and has had better arms too. For if the truth were well known, Rapier hath but one arm.
Sword bear arms. He's a base companion. Alas, I have known you bear a basket sword.
If you look in the book of armory, I'll warrant you, you shall find sword of more antiquity than your rapier. He deserves his pedigree from Morglove, Beavis of Southampton's sword, and from St. George, his sword that killed the dragon.
Aye, the dragon in Sussex the other day. Oh, warrant you rapiers of as good a blood as he for his heart.
By the mass, I think indeed you are both well sanguined. You're both of one blood, but only there's this difference. Sword comes out of the elder brother, and rapier of the younger.
And oftentimes the younger brother proves the better soldier.
Nay, Dagger will defend you both, as for good soldiers.
Rapier, a soldier. When did you ever know a rapier fight a battle?
Yes, Rapier is a soldier, and a man as well armed at all points as anyone.
No, no, it's sword that's the notable soldier. Why, there's none of all you captains could do anything in war without him.
I hope Rapier hath not been at fencing school all this while for nothing.
Alas, there's none master of defense but Dagger. But yet, if you speak of soldiers, there's bow, bill, and gun worth 20 such as we are.
Indeed, they say that Beau has been an old soldier.
If he's not fit for a soldier, any man may bend him as he list.
As for bowstring, I dare undertake to whip him myself.
Then let me alone to tickle Beau's own naughty face.
But what say you to Bill? He's a notable sturdy villain.
Bill, I'll pay him soundly if e'er I reach him.
It's more than you can do, I'm afraid, for Bill's a tall fellow on his hands, and will quickly be wood. And then there's Gun, another such bouncing fellow too.
Gun, alas, he's nobody. Any little boy will make him roar. I have made him go off in the fields many good times myself.
Well, is Gun nobody? I'm sure he'll give blows sometimes.
It's ne'er but when Powderoa charges him. Then indeed he'll be somewhat hotter the matter.
Powder is a vile bragger. He doth nothing but crack.
Faith, I know not what soldier he is, but they say he's an excellent politician.
He, a politician?
Why, he has an excellent wit.
Pish, 'tis nothing but a flash.
I'm sure I can remember since he was a parliament man.
He a parliament man? For what shire?
Yea, by'r lady, it was for the whole country.
I wonder they should choose him. Why he does everything on the sudden.
Oh, he plots shrewdly. If they had not looked to it, he had undermined the whole Parliament House.
Aye, but he's nobody nowadays. He's blown up long ago.
Well, if either you or anybody else should meet with Powder yet it's 100 to 1 if he meet not with his match.
Nay, you should let him alone, Dagger. and you should see that Sword's as notable a bragger as Powder. He thinks that he shall ne'er be matched, too. But he shall, and overmatched, too. By Rapier, I warrant him. Come, Sword. After your long parley, dare you go into the fields?
Dare I? You shall soon see that. Go and I'll follow you.
Well said, desperate Dick. Sword, you may be ashamed to offer it. You know you are a two-handed sword, and Rapier has but one hand, unless I help him, to do any good withal, and yet you'd have him go to the field with you. Come, there's neither of you shall go. Do not you know that duels are put down? You'll be bound to the peace ever hereafter, but if you strike but one stroke, therefore, you had best let me decide your controversy for you.
Well, you are a back friend to us both, Dagger.
Nay, you know I'm equally allied to you both, and therefore shall prove an impartial judge. How say you, will you be ruled by me?
Nay, let him choose. Rapier's at a good point, whether he will or no.
Why are you so long, Sword, before you speak?
Are duels put down? And I am forced to be friends. Speak, then.
Then, in brief, it shall be thus. Sword, you shall bear chief force in the camp, and be made general of the field, to bear sway everywhere. As for you, Rapier, since duels are put down, you shall live quietly and peaceably here in the court, and go every day in velvet. You shall be friends with everyone, and be on everyone's side, that if occasion serve and Sword be absent, so that matters are driven to a push, Rapier shall be the only man to perform a combat, and I myself will back you both as occasion shall serve. How say you? Are you content?
We are.
Then go before to my house, to the Dagger in Cheap, and there we'll conclude all.
A long sword.
Exeunt sword and rapier.
Our weapons drawn, and yet no hurt ye find. Did Dagger then defend unto your mind? He that defended others not long since, at last he dares not stand in his own defense. But this he hopes, with you it will suffice, to crave a pardon for the scholar's prize.
And they exit. There are several really bad good jokes in there that I was really enjoying.
So many puns.
There are so many puns. That's sort of what these plays do. And the problem is, it's fine when the puns are obvious, but sometimes they're just so of their time that you're going, okay, I think I figured out what this pun is doing, but I'm not actually sure I'm 100% getting it right. However, Rapier's exit line, "a long sword," is just, it's just, oh, it's up there with "that's a great coat," and similar. Yeah, there are some really nice political things in here. Ones that people will get today. All of the gunpowder plot stuff, when they're talking about powder, I think a lot of that really works because it's still a very well-known moment in history. You know, it's 10 years or so as far as they're concerned. It's 400 years for us, but it still lands, and all of that stuff is quite, you know, it's all quite blown up. And he's nothing but a flash. It's just,
yeah.
Meet with his match. I mean, they're all the same puns, just played out. They're really, I did like them. Lynn,
it's sort of interesting that they're all just kind of dismissive of gun. Like we're really in denial about the fact that firearms are the future of warfare. Yeah, like, edged weapons are still like, yes, like we know what we're doing. We're the thing. Johnny come lately, gun. Like,
yeah. And we get a little bit. We get a little bit of sort of more contemporary politics because, of course, I think James has sort of put down an edict against dueling within a year or so of this coming out. So, you know, do not you know that duels are put down? So, you know, they're having this. They're basically saying, let's go out and have a fight, and the justice of the peace is going, you know, we're not allowed to do that anymore, and that's rather fun. as a little historical moment as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting how it's sort of the more we read through it, the vaguer it became to me in terms of history as well as the more contemporary, because you've got these references, as you said, to the gunpowder plot and to recent, although dueling kept being outlawed in various places over time, all the time, and it didn't stop people killing each other.
Mm.
Um, but yes, you know, when we started, one of the first things leveled at sword was backsword, which would indicate he's only edged on one side. Um, Later on, they refer to a basket hilt, which is just a particular sort of shape of guard around the hand. But
And
even later, it's called a two-handed sword.
Mm.
And a two-handed longsword would be significantly older in kind of origin and indeed in terms of its period of popularity. Um, in any case, all three of these would have been indeed battlefield weapons, which is why he's so proud of being a soldier and that the rapier isn't,
Mm.
because of the stuff we were talking about before. But yes, a two-handed longsword would be significantly larger, both in terms of where you hold it and how big a weapon it is. Um, so you know, there's a lot of flexibility with what they're actually representing. They seem to be representing categories because dagger is the same, right? A companion weapon to a rapier is different in construction and in use to something like this, which is a rondel dagger that would have been used on a battlefield to in the sort of 1500s, to, you know, complete your kill, so to speak.
Mm.
You've knocked the person down, and then you're grabbing that into somewhere really uncomfortable, um, and exposed. So, you know, yeah, daggers have been around for a really long time, and this dagger seems to be representing the entire category rather than a specific moment in time.
Yeah,
Interesting.
because I think there is this element here that the playwright is having their cake and eating it repeatedly, of going, well, which pun am I going to do next? Which little reference am I going to do next? Well, that one's not technically this sword, but it'll do because it's a sword thing, and that's therefore where the gags are coming from. So yeah, this whole thing, you're a two-handed weapon and you're a one-handed weapon, and making that a character note. I mean, here's the question: how do you costume this? I mean, in a sense, it's straightforward. You've got a bluff soldier and a slightly more fancy setup for rapier. But you know, do we cover them in tinfoil? Do we paint them like the Tin
Yeah,
Man?
right,
You know, how literal do we
I think
go?
Rapier is dressed in velvet.
Is he in velvet?
I think so.
Yeah.
He'll go in
Yes,
velvet.
in its own time, I have no idea what would have been done. But what makes sense to me as a sort of with a modern eye is rather than representing the object, it's representing the people who would have worn them
Mm.
and having them armed with. Because if you've got you know, if you've got sword all in mail and you've got rapier in sort of court finery, you've immediately got a massive amount of contrast. But I don't know how you dress dagger in
You
this
know, kind of in
context.
ordinary street clothes, I would think. I mean, you know, daggers are very much an everyday weapon.
Well, he's described as a justice of the peace, so that could be a clue on that sense. You know, what's the
Soberly
equivalent
dressed.
today? A policeman. It's not quite that. It'd be something a little more like a magistrate or something,
Yeah.
because it's not quite the same as police. In that sense, but he is there to keep the peace. I mean, he explicitly talks about that. So I suppose there is a bit of a hello.
Yeah. Um, it's interesting how they, you know, when they have these comparisons, when they're talking about, first of all, how well they would do against each other, and then, oh, sorry, I've just seen flourish and remembered good bad puns. Sword hath flourished in his days, and flourish is also a thing you can do with a sword. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
and pommel for pommel and
yeah, yes, all of that. But yes, so when they go from comparing themselves to each other, which is the thing that was still happening at this point, right? There were people masters of defense writing fencing manuals and sort of explaining things like, on the battlefield, your rapier would be useless. So learn to fight with a cavalry sword, etc. But also there are these things, not comparative necessarily, although I'm sure those existed as debates. But the fencing manuals usually included a lot of different, particularly if they were for warfare, a lot of different weapons or weapon systems. So things like, Dagger says something. They talk about bow and what they can do against a bow. They talk about the bill, which is a pole arm. It's a sort of hooky bladey bit on a stick. Yeah. But because it's a pole arm, it's got a lot of reach. So
right,
they're sort of going, well, yeah. I can get him too if I'll pay him soundly if ever I reach him. And what are you going to do against the gun? These sort of things are things that you would have studied as, again, a learned gentleman being taught defense, or being taught the art of war, and potentially buying one of these books from someone like, I don't know, Silver, Thibault, whoever's the latest. So it's not for us as a modern audience. We've kind of lost some of that context of, oh, hang on a second, these are discussions or points that are being made at the time. And I wonder, as a modern audience, what we can do about that. How we can make it. I don't know what the word is, sing for us a bit more without needing me to do a pre-show presentation.
Yes. Well, there's some. Well, we have actually. There is a performance history for this. It was performed in 1904 as part of a sort of series of events, mostly music. But I think they also did some. I don't know if they did actual fencing demonstrations, but I think they did a bit of work demonstrating some of the manuals and kind of some of the thing. And I think that you could make that part, because it's so short. You'd need to do something around it if you were going to do it as part of an evening. Say, I mean, for the podcast, there will be. We'll do when we record it, we'll do a spoilers episode where I will attempt to explain all of the jokes beforehand, and it will be very much like so we did one Priest the Barber recently, which is full of terrible puns and also jokes that are incomprehensible, and the glossing took longer than the actual thing. And it shares, actually, I would be surprised if it's not the same author, actually, because we have almost exactly the same gag and the same phrasing. Come forth, I'll give thee a crown, though it be but a cracked one. There's a whole riff on cracked crowns in Priest the Barber. And I think, yeah, there is either a very known shtick available or similar bits and pieces. So I think for the audio version, it's straightforward. For a live version, I think we can look back to 1904 and say you can make this a part of an evening that is historically themed and will mutually explicate itself without necessarily someone standing up and explaining all the jokes beforehand in the way that I will have to do for the podcast, in a way that's more satisfying.
Mm-hmm. That's the thing. If you watch this with an understanding, but without a pre-show lecture, then you don't feel like someone's preached to you, but you feel clever because you get the jokes. And I think, it can be funny. The thing I would suggest is in any kind of visual medium, I think it would sit a lot better than it might in an audio medium, because you can use visual explicatives, as it were. You can sort of illustrate things to make the point that you are making with the words a lot clearer. And also, you could choreograph some violence.
Exactly.
to make it exciting.
There is violence here. There's the opportunity, because they basically break up a fight at the beginning, and that's the thing about who's this behind me. If there is this sort of come and have a go moment at the beginning, you could have at least the beginnings of a fight that gets broken up by the justice of the peace, and of course you could extend that for as long as you like, and you can add it to some of the sparring. Just little taps, little moments, little gestures, which still have to be carefully choreographed, but
it's not a fight to the death.
No.
It's little moments of comical violence that illustrate the thing we're talking about.
Exactly. No, I think it would be well served physically, and I think with all of actually some of these weird anthropomorphic pieces, some of the absurdity as well can be brought out of the nature of this conversation. Any other thoughts before I close this one? We've managed to drain a lot from this work, as it were. I'm quite pleased. Any final thoughts before I close the session? Okay, it's a 3-hander and it's short. That will be coming out fairly soon. I'm sure we will record this in relatively short measure. Thanks for all the wonderful readers for all their wonderful reading. Thank you very much, everyone, and goodbye.